Hi there, you're listening to Unnatural Selection, the show about newsy type stuff and things. My name is George.
My name is Tom.
And my name is Adam.
And with our powers combined, we are Unnatural Selection. Make sure you visit us at our salubrious home on the web, unnaturalshow.com.
Back for another week, boys. And look, I have a fabulous new webcam. You can see my entire room now. I've had to hide all the washing out in the corridor behind me. So
it doesn't work when you then tell us that you've done that.
It is an unforgivingly wide angle, is what you're saying. It is. There's nothing that the all-seeing eye of Logitech does not see.
Yeah, you've got a fantastic fishbowl effect going on there.
A fishbowl with a fishbowl wine glass as well.
Yeah, fishbowl wine glass, and I must say you're looking very standard def today, Adam. Are you feeling all right?
To be fair, it is not a Logitech camera. It is a 1080 high definition webcam from China, which is 2.1 megapixels. So
is that the brand? That's a long brand name.
No, it just says HD webcam is the product. That's what it's called.
Just Speedy Pete's HD webcam from totallyrealstore.net.
$40 HD. It sounds like it's all right. No worries. Let's buy that.
Yeah, 2.1 megapixel is probably not as many megapixels as you could have gone for.
It's like a 2007 phone camera. That's what we're rocking right now.
And yet,
and
yet still a step up from what you were doing before. So,
winner, chicken dinner. Yeah, gentlemen, so it's been another week.
Yeah.
The world
has continued to happen to us. Something which someone highlighted for me just the other day was that Tiger King was March.
Yeah.
That was March, and it's June.
I can't remember who I was talking to the other day. I think it was my partner's brother, because we were just like, man, it's only June, yeah? I was like, yeah, remember when the country was on fire? Those were the days. That was 6 months ago.
I saw a great meme.
When it was only the country being on fire, and we're like, I just don't see how we're going to possibly make it
survive this.
I just don't know.
I remember seeing that, being like, this is the end of day.
Do you know what it is?
I remember when I was smoking in the city, and I was like, fuck, this is it. This is what's going to turn climate
Can't
change
get
around.
worse than
People
this.
are going to care. And then, it was so much more to come.
I saw a meme earlier on today that it was like, 2020 is just like, it was like the worst television show. So many plot lines, not finished. Why introduce the murder hornets if you're not going to use them, right? The sad writing.
As Anton Chekhov once said, if you see a murder hornet above the mantelpiece in Act 1, you know the murder hornet needs to be used in Act 3. That's the structure it plays. That's how
we could be pulling a Game of Thrones here, though. So, like, November, December is just when we drop the murder hornets back in. Because, you saw them at the start.
Opening loops.
And you were like, what's the deal with these murder hornets? And then it's about all this other political intrigue and coronavirus. But the murder hornets are just niggling at the back of your mind, but you only saw them in the first episode, and then bam!
The murder hornets are like Gendry.
2020.
The murder hornets are going to be rowing for 3 seasons, and we'll see them come back later on.
And way more handsome and taller.
I don't think we can give the writers of 2020 that much credit. I think it's more like an episode of Neighbours where one day, or like Grey's Anatomy, where it's like one day they're in a plane crash, and the next day there's a bomb scare, and the next day, McSteamy's broken up with whoever he's dating at that point, and then on the third day, the hospital's going to close down, and like it's just it's an episodic plot line as opposed to a overarching narrative. I think we're not watching high quality drama. I think it's more of a quick thrills,
Well, no, in our analogies from the past few years of just what season of America are we up to at the moment, it's like if Trump doesn't get reelected, it's a pretty wild final season. I'll give him that.
They've left us with a solid
1 season left.
Solid cliffhanger.
Just throw everything in.
Yeah, I do wonder. I personally have been like publicly wondering aloud, along with Bill Maher and a few other people, like, if he loses, do we really think he's just going to leave? He's just going to go, okay, you got me, fair enough. Okay, I'm going to be the bigger man and pack my bags.
You and Joe Biden have been wondering that. I saw someone like ask him that direct question, just being like, "Yeah, do you think he'll leave the White House willingly?" He's like, I don't know. I guess we'd have to get the military involved.
I know it's like slightly, I don't know, there's something like slightly cynical about, but I've just found this new poll feature on the Facebook live stream where you can poll your audience as you're listening and they can give you live feedback. And I'm like, is it slightly cynical of me to be like, what do you think about the downfall of democracy in the United States? Yay or nay? Like,
it's a loaded question.
But yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think Trump will just leave of his own accord if and when he loses, or what's the story?
I think it'll be a different scenario, right? Because it won't be he loses and he's like, I don't care that I lost. I'm never leaving. I'll barricade myself in the office. He'll just say that the losing vote isn't real.
Yeah.
Like that's his whole thing, right? He'll just say it's fake. Oh, it's all fake. It's made up. Lying Washington Post or whatever are just saying bullshit. I actually did win, and I'm staying here as the rightful king of all.
Well, the way it works with most situations where you have a dictator that stays in power.
I thought you were going to say dictatorships, and I was like, yes, go on.
Yeah, with most dictators, you send in America, and
I really hope someone comes in and installs democracy in this America country.
Oh yeah, just introduce genes and Christianity, and it'll be great.
Yeah,
the
bikinis
way
and blue jeans, that's all it takes.
It seems to work is that if it's a clear-cut victory for Biden, yeah, he'll leave. He's not going to. Won't be happy about it, but he's not going to. I think.
Oh, he'll piss and moan about it on Twitter.
Barricade himself in the White House. I think where it will get complicated, and as it is with a lot of South American countries, is when the result is in dispute, and that's something that Trump will probably try and do. Is somehow, if it's close, is there a way of somehow casting the whole result into doubt, and then for being able to go, well, it's not conclusive, and therefore somehow the Constitution, is on his side.
You can't kick me out until you've figured out what the whole deal is. Yeah,
but it's hard with America as well because you have the college system. So really, even if it does get down to the wire like it did last election, can you really? How do you know what's going to happen?
I have seen some promising poll results. Biden being up on Trump in national polling pretty consistently by 6 to 8 points.
But didn't we see great polling last time?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was just about to say.
Hillary's gonna win.
Like, take it with the largest hunk of salt.
Scott Morrison can't possibly win. Yeah. This is the unwinnable election. Bill Shorten's got it in the bag.
I'm always dubious of polling, especially when so much is like riding on it, and it's so much is at stake, and it's kind of like a win or lose proposition, right? Like either you become the president or you don't. So it's not like you can be sort of half pregnant with the presidency. It's so take it with a grain of salt. But like there have been quite a few, not just in like national polls, but like in state polls. Like if Biden simply maintains the amount of states that Hillary won last time around, and all indications are that he should. He's more popular than Hillary on a lot of different metrics. He's a lot more popular with old people as well than Hillary was against Trump. So if he maintains Hillary's states and wins any of the ones that Trump won by a small margin, he's at 270 electoral votes. So
I just think
it looks like it could be good. It's too early to tell, but
we have several months of economic recovery to go yet.
Economic recovery or economic not recovery, as the case may be. But
well, it depends what happens, right? So if that goes his way, those results are, it'll be a whole new set of data in a few months. I
am hopeful. We do have one respondent to the poll saying, do you think Trump will voluntarily leave if he will leave voluntarily if he loses the 2020 election? And the response has been no. So currently it's 100% no for Donald Trump, and that's exactly how statistics works, folks. So
I love percentages.
100% of respondents to the poll said no. So there you go.
But yeah, things in the US march on, and a few
literally
updates on last week. The protests are still going, obviously. An update to the 75-year-old man that was shoved by the Buffalo police. Apparently has suffered a brain injury.
Yeah, because that's what happens when you crack your head so hard that you bleed out your ears.
Yeah, but
because they shoved him over.
The good news is at least Donald Trump has been pretty sensitive about the whole issue. Oh, no, he said he was an Antifa infiltrator. Okay.
Cool.
That's cool, because we live in
Can
the
someone
darkest
explain
timeline.
to Trump that I don't, like, unless I'm, like, woefully, like, misunderstanding this, Antifa's not, like, a group that, like, holds, like, a clubhouse or whatever, like...
Well, they're an incorporated association with a president, a secretary, and they report to the Premier Affairs Victoria. So.
He's talking about them like they're ISIS, and I'm like, no, I think they're just people who hate you.
The problem with anarchists is it's very difficult to organize them. It's not by their very nature. They're not wanting to sit around a table and go through stuff. There's also like to the extent that like Antifa is like real or imagined whatsoever is kind of like it's anyone can just sort of call themselves Antifa because anti-fascist kind of means just about whatever the fuck you want.
I thought it was like what are they called, the Guy Fawkes mask people?
Anonymous.
Whatever. Like it's kind of like you can just say you are like so you just show up in like black skivvies and a balaclava and do some graffiti and be like we're Antifa and have like a symbol. Like it's not like you can't just be like let's call them a terrorist organization when they're not even really an organization.
One thing that's been, really, I think, from that, if you look at sort of who's causing some of the violence, the terror, or you want to call it, there is evidence that it's either far right activists infiltrating and sort of causing, misdirection, or potentially, I don't know if there's any substantiated evidence, but it certainly would be on, I think, the mind of places like the FBI and stuff about whether or not, foreign influence or active measures are in place, just stirring the shit. And which is another thing which will be interesting to see whether if that occurs and if it is occurring right now, if it continues up until the election, to try and again cause this shit stir and destabilization.
I am definitely cognizant that a lot of the social unrest that we are seeing does bear the hallmarks of the kind of stuff that we saw in the wake of the 2016 election with like Renee DeResta is a great academic who's looked at this in depth around sort of Russian infiltration in the 2016 election and fomenting discord and, setting up Black Lives Matter protests across the street from like a white supremacy march. And like, this is well documented stuff that's occurred in order to foment discord in the States. And it does seem to me that it would be an opportune, like I haven't seen any evidence, but like it seems like the exact kind of moment that if you were maintaining active measures against someplace like the United States, this would be the perfect thing to take advantage of as well. So I'd be surprised if we don't see a bunch of commentary in the next, couple. If we don't get an update 3 days after the election being like, all of that discord was fomented by outside actors. It would have been good for you guys to have this information in advance. But no, we waited till November 8th to publish. So
yeah.
A day before the election. What was it when they... that was the Hillary Clinton emails I'm thinking of.
Comey.
Yeah, that Comey just said, we're looking into her again. Just wipes his hands of it. Yeah.
But with the US thing, I guess a lot of what's been some of the commentary around everything has been that they want to defund the police.
Which we touched on last week.
It's interesting because when you say defund the police, it's not specifically or dismantle the police or whatever. There's a few different sort of D words that are being used.
Yeah.
What that actually means, and there's an article that we've got here by the ABC, sorry.
Yeah.
Which talks to a bit about that.
So essentially, a lot of rallying cries in the wake of the George Floyd protests about defunding the police or abolishing the police or dismantling the police. And they all sort of mean different things. When people talk about defunding the police, what they're actually talking about is a specific set of policy measures that, if you are in the world of criminal justice reform, these are well-documented, established things that people know about. Defunding the police is not, let's take away their funding. But I fear that defund the police as a rallying cry, while it's good if it's on a placard, it does kind of make white conservative America shit themselves a little bit. And it doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean take all the money away from police departments. What it means is, in ways where there have been systematic overfunding for police departments to deal with specific areas that are sort of traditionally outside their jurisdiction, maybe we should redirect those funding efforts to more traditional mental health services and community service efforts in order to divert responsibility away from the police, as well as to get outcomes for better outcomes for services that are specifically community services that are meant to address these issues.
It's a call to completely rethink how policing works.
And the example,
a lot of people are taking that to be like, no, let's just get rid of police, anarchy in the streets.
No. And for a president who's positioned himself as being literal law and order, he just keeps tweeting it every now and then, like he's Dick Wolf's producer, is just dun law and order, just randomly tweets it out of nowhere. I'm
pretty sure that's just his just campaign strategy, guys, just being like, can you put a tweet about that?
Just schedule it, just whack it on Hootsuite. It'll be relevant in a week, I'm sure.
He might just think his phone's his remote. And he's just trying
Law and order.
Law and order.
SVU.
Next up we'll just see pornography.
So the problem is, so the example that is used is Camden, New Jersey, right? It's a city in America that had really overwhelming issues with police corruption and violence and complaints against them. And they say, look, well, they defunded their police. They completely abolished the department. And they've restructured it, got rid of the union, got rid of everything, and then basically started a new police force with these community policing measures in mind, with new guidelines on force, very prescriptive, lengthy guidelines on how to use force, and obviously funding for these other services that would help to, make the police not the first port of call whenever anything goes wrong in Camden, New Jersey. And apparently they've had really good results. But you'll notice that they didn't just abolish the police and say, you're on your own now. Which is what white conservative people are hearing. And they're just like, well, it's just chaos reigns now. I guess it's the purge. So
I don't know whether or not there are some people probably giving that. I mean, this is a guess.
Giving that impression.
Or that are
when you say
using that
abolish
rallying
the police,
cry, that they actually think, let's abolish the police. That'd be a great idea. Which obviously in a city like LA or New York where there's several million people, that's just not practical, right?
Yeah,
but it's another phrasing thing. If they mean abolish the police, in that, talking about the police as the group that they are, not the concept of punishment or consequences for crime.
But in classic democratic style, they've been too busy tripping over their own nutsacks to try and get any effective messaging out about what this might actually be or look like. And I get it. I sympathize with, if you're a protester, having a sign up that says defund the police is a much more effective way of communicating more or less what you're trying to say than we need to systematically re-examine all the ways in which entrenched corruption has embedded itself in our police force and rewrite the structures that underlie those things significantly to make sure that that inequality is not further systematized and pushed into the next generation. That doesn't fit on us.
Size 8 font?
You're talking
Times New Roman? What are we talking about?
Arial, minimum. You can't make it any smaller than Type 6 font, and it just doesn't look as good on a sign. So,
that's true.
Lines of code in the Matrix. You're like, I don't even see the code anymore. I just see blue and
red. It's almost like people need to apply rational thinking and research and thought to what they're seeing from the protesters, right?
Yes,
not just being like, I see the words defund the police and I go, cool.
Yes, but
I won't think about that anymore.
You do have certain elements out there that are saying things like abolish the police, and that is what they mean. They want there to be no police. And it's like, that's not I'm sorry, that's just not a practical solution. And you saying that scares off the exact middle class, like
you lose the middle ground.
You lose the moderate middle class white people that you fucking need to win this election. And for me, like, yes, the systemic issues are real. They are a problem. They need to be addressed. But like, number one focus on anything, on any political action needs to be on defeating Trump. And anything you do that puts that goal into question is dangerous. Like, we cannot risk another 4 years of Trump because you weren't careful enough with your words. You know, like, you got to find it. Like, conservatives seem to find a way to effectively message their shit.
It's interesting. Speaking about messaging, I was speaking to you guys before the show about the perception that the Republican movement's put out of Donald Trump being a Christian to try and get the hearts and minds of the Christian movement, right?
Adam, I'm very religious, okay? My favorite passage is 2 Corinthians, okay? 1 Corinthians is great. 3 Corinthians, very good. But my favorite, gotta be 2 Corinthians.
Well, this was asked. That was asked about. I think he was asked that after he was asked previously, what's your favorite passage of the Bible? And he's like, oh, it's very personal.
All of it.
Yeah, that's too personal a question to ask. Like, you know, I like the Bible. I just don't want to get into specifics.
New Testament, Old Testament, all great testaments.
Oh, yeah, I read both of them. They're both great.
So good. So many testaments.
I haven't heard the bit about 2 Corinthians. I'll have to have a look at that video.
Oh, that was ages ago. That was from when he was running.
Okay.
And he was like reading a Bible passage at like some religious conservative university. And he's reading from 2 Corinthians. And it's like, we all, like, anyone who's ever picked up a Bible knows it's 2 Corinthians. Like, you don't. Anyway. But
well, it's shorthand, George. You know, superlatives. Look, what was interesting was that I was at a family gathering over the weekend, and one person tried to sort of defend Trump as a good Christian role model. And I was like, well, if you're a religious person and you believe, you know, that's part of who you are, surely you must look past the Republican communiques and the Bible upside down photo op to be able to look at whether or not he is actually a good Christian. Because if you believe in Christianity, surely you believe in leading by example and the whole, you know, the concept of Jesus being, you know, leading by example and that kind of thing. Leadership is service, and to just swallow all of the
propaganda.
Propaganda. Thank you, and not even question it. I found absolutely shocking. But it goes to show that there are many voters that will just do that, which also relates back to when people say defund the police. They're not looking into the what that means. They're just going, oh, that's the surface level issue. We're not going to deep dive any further than that. And that's just the way voters think.
It is sometimes a struggle for me to remember that most people are not, nor should they be necessarily as deeply ensconced in all of these things as we are. Most people just want to live their lives, and who's the president matters as much as what their star sign is, right?
And that happens in Australia as well, to be clear, or everywhere, Britain,
everywhere.
You know, other countries, whatever.
But the problem is you risk becoming a victim of in this case, the president's, you know, substantial propaganda apparatus. If you don't pay attention, if you don't listen into anything, if you don't look into anything further, how do you know when time comes to vote? All you've got is your gut feeling. And it's like, I'm a conservative, so I'll vote conservative. And so...
But there's a lot more sort of, like, I guess this is all anecdotal on my part, but I mean, for a lot of people, there's like access to the resources to learn more or look into more of these issues can be a bit tricky. But on top of that, like outside of the major cities in the States, like the news coverage of Trump is really different. Like my some of my partner's friends who've lived in the States like had met people who, until they met someone from outside the country, had no idea that we all thought Trump was rubbish. Like had no idea that he was the laughing stock of the world, and we all thought he was nuts because like, you know, how much like Fox Media, like owning all like the more rural regional news stations and that monopoly, because you know, like not international, but like entire national news, like New York Times and stuff like that, is not as big out there. So they're like, not only maybe is the resources to look into things a bit more, or like actually kind of gather more information, be tricky for like socioeconomic reasons, but on top of that, the information, just like what they're supposed to be looking into, just isn't even presented to them.
I watched Media Watch the other night, and I love Media Watch. Like, get on Media Watch if you don't watch Media Watch.
Love me some Media Watch.
It's a good time. When I was studying journalism, it was always like everyone's biggest fear. Like every journalist loves Media Watch until they're on it.
That's their tagline, like, isn't it? Everyone loves it till they're on it, something like that.
Yeah, loves it till they're on it. And the teacher was like, yeah, I've been on it.
And they had what's his name? Paul Barry?
Paul Barry.
Yeah,
Paul Barry,
did a section on the way the media has been portrayed over the last sort of fortnight in the US, and how they've, journalists have been arrested and that kind of thing. But the other thing he covered was that the trust in the media is at an all-time low in the United States. The concept that the average American will not absorb, well, maybe not in every city, but for large parts of the US, there are the trust in whatever's coming out of the television, app on their phone, newspaper, the trust in what's being given to them is as low as it's ever been.
And I think that's probably due to like a few different things. Is like the media, like the incentive structure that governs how media is funded is like broken and is breaking.
Yep.
The fact, so all these advertising revenues that used to go to newspapers and local TV stations and things, like local news, who actually does like the digging and finds the stories about local corruption and state corruption that actually matter. They're falling off a cliff, even for like publications that we know and can name. Those advertising dollars are just plummeting. So it's resorted to a lot more clickbaity titles. It's resorted to people having to, organizations having to cut down on journalists and fact checking and things like that, which, one reporter has to cover 27 different beats now. And because they're spread so thin, they miss things, they get things wrong, which further reduces the credibility of the media. Like there's a lot of different things. There's also like a deliberate attempt from conservative media to flood the zone in terms of the amount of coverage that's out there. You've got, ownership, like Sinclair Media, which is a sort of hyper-conservative media sort of ownership group that sort of buys up little conservative TV stations and then doesn't just propagate it's not just like a little garden where they allow conservatism to grow. There's like must-read pieces that they pass down to their news anchors, and you can see supercuts of this shit online where news anchors from 10 different rural broadcasting services are literally reading the exact same script word for word.
Yeah.
That and like own One American News Network, which is basically a far-right pro-Trump cable channel, which like if Fox wasn't hyper-conservative psychotic enough, you've got OWN, which is basically tailoring what they like. Their audience is an audience of one, which is they want Trump to see what they put out, and because it agrees exactly with his thinking, and then he amplifies it and goes, look, it's justified because it's on the media, which is OWN, which is what tells me what I want to hear. So I amplify that, which like it's this weird like Mobius strip of conservative psychoticism. And like, meanwhile, everyone else is like reading the New York Times and Washington Post, and we're like, how's anyone still falling for this bullshit? Like, it's two separate ecosystems altogether. And further exacerbated by Facebook and YouTube algorithms, which, promote the more extreme version of whatever it is you're watching, literally pulls you down the rabbit hole. Like, it's so very broken right now.
And this thing that we forget as well is that there's a population of, was it 320 something million? So, the amount of people and the amount of differing opinions that obviously come with such a large group of people, it's immense. And doesn't help, because it's hard to get, unless you're China, it's hard to get 328 million people on the same page, following the same narrative.
China's got some some techniques for getting a bunch of people on the same page. Not all of which would be acceptable in a free society, I imagine.
Should we transition to talking about China?
Sure.
Yeah.
Unless you had anything, Tom, to add about. I feel like I've been talking over you a little bit. I apologize.
No, not at all. More. I was more thinking about how the both media coverage, but also just political response to the similar inequality protests and all that sort of stuff from the US is happening over here, because that hit quite a bit of a loggerhead this week, in a way that got me a bit riled up, where our Prime Minister just went on the offensive towards protesters for our over incarceration and violence and death to Indigenous peoples in Australia at the hands of police in sort of many ways, saying that he thinks that like all the protesters should be charged and all that sort of stuff, which he conveniently didn't say when they were all anti-vaxxer 5G conspiracy nut bars maybe a month or so ago. It was a free country back then, according to him.
Yeah, it is interesting how
so rich.
Scott Morrison's hyper-conservatism has created this weird sort of permission structure for protest about what up until 5 years ago in Australian politics would have been completely fringe, ridiculous issues like, Blair Cottrell and the far right sort of political shitbaggery that he represents, and 5G conspiracy theories and anti-vaxxers. Like, these were things which were, I feel like up until about 5 years ago, like third rails of Australian politics. Like, you had the one odd, Pauline Hanson or what was his name, the sovereign citizen,
Malcolm Roberts.
Malcolm Roberts. Like, yeah, the odd.
He's back. He's been around.
He's been a bit quieter recently, though.
Yeah, he's been a bit quieter.
You have the odd nut bar, but like largely those ideas were sort of a third rail in Australian politics, and it seems like they are no longer. The Overton window has shifted pretty substantially. Like we're always, when we lost the last, well, we didn't lose the last election, but when the lefties lost the last election, I remember saying something to the effect of like, we live in a country that is more conservative than we are. And I think over the subsequent, couple of years, it's been pulled even more to the right, to the extent that, you've got this, and I don't think Scott Morrison would say necessarily that he's like anti 5G or an anti-vaxxer or anything like that per se, but by dragging the discourse even further to the right, what you've done is as I said, created a permission structure for the rest of these people to feel comfortable enough in airing their views, right?
Just to be clear, did Scott Morrison? I don't think he would have endorsed the protest when they did that outside Victoria.
No, he did. No, but when people had a crack,
say?
Well, he said like when asked about like people are protesting like. Against social distancing and like lockdown rules and all that sort of stuff. He said it's a free country; they're allowed to protest. It's a state's issue.
But when you've got people protesting about Black Lives Matter and Indigenous Lives Matter, later on when case numbers have dropped pretty substantially, they're opening up the economy where you would think even though, yes, it's still against social distancing rules, it is less of a danger now to conduct those kind of protests than it was then. All of a sudden, he's more vociferously critical. So I do think it's a little bit rich to say that he hasn't played. It's important when you're the Prime Minister. What you don't say is sometimes also as important as what you actually go and say. If you don't condemn one group of people for conducting the same action as another group of people, that says a lot about what your leanings are and the kind of permission that these people feel they're getting from the very top of the government to go ahead and conduct this kind of protest.
Yeah, it was just the gall. When I saw that quote, I was like, are you fucking serious? Like it breaks my brain. Like up there with his like, I wish students were less activist. Like when the climate protests last year and whatever.
And you almost don't blame him, because if you're a conservative politician, you don't want students protesting, because guess what? They're not protesting for corporate tax rate cuts. They're not protesting for pro-conservative issues. If they're young, it's probably because they've got a conscience and they don't want to see the world burn, which is inherently an anti-conservative agenda nowadays.
Yeah, which kind of like screws his plans. Yeah, but so it's been a bit of an interesting fallout given the last week, because I know we touched on it a little bit, but like the whole pepper spraying incident that happened in Sydney. I haven't seen a lot sort of come out of that in terms of reprimand or anything for the officers involved, because it was just absurd, excessive force. But yeah, we were talking before the show as well that because the Queen's birthday happened this past week. Well, and it's not even her birthday. We just get a random Monday off for reasons.
What are public holidays anymore? It's ceased to have any meaning for me at this point. Like, it was just like, oh, it was a public holiday today? Okay.
Well, yeah, well, I guess, you know, I'm still working from home. I got to sit at a different computer on my Monday rather than the one over there, the fun one here. No, but so on that day, they also do the Order of Australia announcements, like, you know, kind of like the Australian version of a knighthood or whatever, like, you know, whatever fancy, like sort of really high up recognition. And some people got them that was a bit questionable and on the nose. One of them being good old Tony Abbott. I believe for two reasons. One was for his contribution to border force, to like what he did for Australia's borders, which I don't know,
here's a gold medal for your most problematic. Here's your most problematic achievement, medalized for you.
Yeah, medalized, and then on top of that, also for all his work as the envoy to Indigenous communities in Australia. Which I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I could name a single fucking thing he did while he was that envoy, let alone that was positive.
It was all good. It was all good. Too many good things to name.
It was all perfect.
All done. You need to add too many achievements. That's why we can't think of them.
Eminent service to the Indigenous community.
Yeah.
Eminent or imminent? Imminent is then it's going to happen.
Eminent.
Oh, any day now. Any day, Tones. You can do it then. It's just absolute madness. Like, and we're well beyond taking the piss at this point.
And you said, Tom, there was we were talking about this before the show. You mentioned there was also a famous Indigenous educator sandwiched between these two.
Yes, so I was just gonna grab the actual list. Oh no, that the government site doesn't actually show the list. That's fun.
Sorry,
Bronwyn Bishop got one as well. Lord knows why.
For appropriate use of helicopters. They're just really rubbing it in our face right now.
Oh, yeah, definitely, of course. Oh, God, where's the... Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Right. So this is, yeah.
All of which is to say, like, someone who actually deserved the award next to Tony Abbott and Bronwyn Bishop.
Someone who deserved the award, also doing great things for Indigenous communities and being an Indigenous person themselves. So to mention them both in the same breath was it's pretty fucked.
Interesting thing, after he got the gong, Mr. Abbott had an interesting comment to make around the reasons behind Indigenous incarceration rates in Australia. And he said, I'll sort of quote a few things here, but basically he said, where's the quote? Mr. Abbott said, Australians have our own atoning to do, but our history nevertheless has been different, I would say better than that of the US. He says, obviously the Indigenous incarceration rate is much higher than the general incarceration rate. That shouldn't be so unless there's evidence that courts are more likely to imprison Indigenous offenders than non-Indigenous offenders, and there is none. So basically what he's trying to say there, according to The Guardian at least, is that the reason for higher rates of incarceration is because they offend more. But that's
okay. But like, it's not because there's any sort of inherent criminality, but you have to acknowledge that the reason that the median wealth of an average white family in Australia and an average Aboriginal Australia, the reason that that is so disparate has to be, at least in part, due to intergenerational trauma, which is the direct result of racist policies that have been implemented in Australia over several hundred years. Like, that doesn't just happen by accident, right? Like, it's not that there's anything inherently genetically different that makes them more, more criminal or anything like that. But if you have an overwhelming minority of people that haven't got access to essential services and education and can't build wealth and can't get ahead, there's more likely to be more criminal activity there, right? Like, it's evidence of the problem.
More particular towards his point that there's no implicit bias with the justice system.
Maybe.
Particularly in New South Wales, there is.
Maybe not.
According to The Guardian, that there is evidence showing that police are more likely to prosecute, for instance, cannabis offences against Indigenous alleged offenders rather than if it's, a privileged white kid. Privileged white kid, you've been caught smoking weed, we'll let you off with a slap on the wrist or, a lesser offence perhaps.
And who knows how much of that has to do with like what sort of economic resources you have to go about defending yourself against those sorts of charges. Like, I think, again, it comes back to inequality and economics and incentives rather than necessarily like overt racism. But like, that is the result of a systemic racist structure. So you've got, I don't know about the Australian Indigenous numbers, but I know in America, for example, that there is no substantive difference in user, in how many users there are of illicit drugs in various groups. So white people and black people and Asian people all smoke weed in more or less roughly the same quantities per capita. And yet, the incarceration rate for African Americans, as opposed to white people, is substantially higher. So it's maybe it's not that you've got a cop that uses the N-word and it's like that classic example of racism, right? But maybe the fact that you're having to police these areas more substantially and arrest these people in higher numbers because they are disadvantaged, that addition of police resources in this one area that has higher crime is a result of these racist systemic structures. Am I making sense? I feel like I'm rambling now. Sorry.
No, you're rambling, but you are making sense.
Yeah, both those things are true.
Thank you.
I don't know. I mean, as we were saying before the show, the Batuta Advocates had a wonderful satirical plot line that they've been doing for the last couple of years where Tony Abbott as the Indigenous envoy got turned into Uncle Tony X as this sort of, stalwart for Indigenous affairs. Of course, taking the piss because he's not. No. And then in real life, he gets an Order of Australia for doing just that.
For doing not much at all.
Interesting thing to note with the Order of Australia, though, is because I do have a family member that's in the order. You have to be nominated, right? So you have to have people that are willing to put you forward.
I could have been up for an Order of Australia this whole time and you guys haven't nominated me. It's pretty selfish of you guys.
I know. Sorry.
10 years we've been doing this.
I was going to nominate Tom, but I mean...
Selfish, Adam.
I mean, George, just don't hit the bar, mate. You don't, not hitting those KPIs. So the point being is that the Order of Australia can be a bit of a rich white person circle jerk. That's the Order of Australia. Queen's Birthday Honours, I'm not sure how that works. That might be a little bit different. I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, I guess you kind of like the general division of the Order of Australia is sort of given on the Queen's Birthday Honours. Sort of weird.
But is the Queen's Birthday Honours, is that the same thing, or is it just that we're saying that we're doing it on the Queen's birthday and it's an honour that you're receiving on? Do you know what I mean? Like, is there a separate system?
On the Queen's birthday, they announced the Queen's Birthday Honours list. They recognised like 933 people. So, obviously we're just picking out a few of them. But, they do them for the general division of the Order of Australia, and then there's a military division as well for more that sort of thing. And by the way, Marcia Langton was who we were talking about before. An Indigenous woman who's a professor at like the University of Melbourne and received the award for advocacy for Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander people and all that sort of stuff. So someone deserving of it.
I mean, even a broken clock is right a third of the time.
Well, yeah. I don't know. Just if the Order of Australia ever includes an onion eating category, Tony should get it.
That's fair enough.
Tony Abbott is a piece of shit, but he ate that onion like a fucking champion, and I maintain that. Didn't even flinch. Just straight like, wow.
You gotta.
Wow.
If nothing else, and it may be that there is nothing else to admire about Tony Abbott. If nothing else, he certainly chowed down on that onion like a fucking hero.
I mean, he volunteers as a firefighter as well, so that's good.
And he's done
objectively good.
Done some excellent work for Speedo's stock price. The budgie smugglers have definitely been a rise in popularity. So
probably a fan.
Yeah, it's not all bad.
It's pretty bad though.
I'm turned around on Tony Abbott. I think I might vote Liberal this time.
What? Let's bring him back.
Unfairly dealt with by the left, I think, Mr. Tones.
I
you heard it here, folks. We're not going to follow up with that at all. That's on Adam's record.
Adam, I'm going to do you the favour and have no follow-up questions.
Thanks, guys. Obviously, I was being sarcastic.
Okay. Before we get some hate mail. So we've got our last article for today was talking about some of the travel advisories that China has, put up for their students wanting to return to Australia to study at some point, saying that there's been a risk assessment done and due to multiple incidents of discrimination targeting of people of Australian descent, they're asking
Asian descent.
What did I say?
You said Australian descent.
Australian descent in Australia, rather. Asian
descent in Australia.
I did it again. Targeting people of Asian descent in Australia.
Nailed it.
So I think John Oliver once described us as the most comfortably racist country in the world. And on this point, I'd have to say...
Yeah, he's right.
I mean, we definitely place. We're... in the racist Olympics, we're definitely on the stage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But... Yeah, so there,
and there have been noted incidents, right, around this happening. So it's not coming from nowhere.
I think largely, if you are in an Australian metropolitan area as an Asian person, I don't think you should feel unsafe. I don't think it's a situation where people aren't safe in the streets or anything like that. Are there incidences of people being racist and abusing Asians, people of Chinese or other descent? Yeah, of course there are. But I don't know.
And there has been some in relation to the whole COVID-19 thing, right? Kind of stand away from the only Asian person on the train or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like, there's not, it's not, I'm going to stop talking. Why don't you keep talking, Adam, instead?
There's a couple of ways you can view the Chinese statement, right?
Uh-huh.
So one way of looking at it is going, okay, fair enough. There's been some instances recently that have been sort of made public exactly what they're talking about. There has been a number of things which have occurred to people in relation to the whole COVID-19 outbreak. Now, a number of incidents. As to how many incidences there have been, that's not really well known. As to whether or not it is unsafe or somehow there is a risk for international students to travel to Australia because of that. That is also something that hasn't really been established. Probably the key thing to understand the context of this statement from China is that it's the latest round of a diplomatic stoush, which apparently, according to China, isn't actually happening. Over Australia's call for an independent inquiry to the source or the response to initial response to the COVID-19 outbreak in Wuhan. That escalated to China got kind of shown up at the UN, where there was kind of a lot of support for that motion, and they all kind of got outvoted in the end.
Of course there was.
that meant that they've then placed tariffs, which apparently are unrelated, on I think it's barley and beef imports. They've also done something else, and I've forgotten what it is now.
I can't remember either. Yeah,
there's a couple of little things they've done. So the barley tariffs. Oh yeah, and basically this effort to try and to advise students against travelling to Australia is another economic power move to the Australian economy, because of course international students from China and of course other countries from overseas is worth something like billions and billions and billions of dollars to the Australian economy.
Yeah.
The university sector has released modelling claiming that it was going to lose up to $16 billion by 2023 due to the impact of COVID-19. So you add on extra public messaging from large foreign governments like China, discouraging further uptake of the education sector. The effects of that are going to be manifold, right? Because every international student coming to Australia is a dollar multiplier. And it reveals a couple of...
Like, international students in Australian universities are big business. Like, there is no doubt about that. Like, and it does kind of frustrate me that we've sort of...
let it happen.
As with many things, that we've allowed our reliance on this external provider for whatever it is. Say it's a supplier of, nappies or whatever it is, or education money in this instance, that we've outsourced that to the extent that we have in search of, because of the profit motive, and that we've allowed ourselves to become so dependent on this foreign source of revenue, I think is deeply concerning, especially when you consider, like, education at its core is not supposed to be to my mind, philosophically,
it's an economic commodity.
It's not a product. Like, education is a way that we all better our society. It is a social good to have an educated populace, not just for the sake of voting and whatever else, but, if you break your leg, you want a qualified doctor to be able to assist you with that problem, right? If you run into legal troubles, you want a qualified lawyer to be able to help you. It is a benefit to all of us to have an educated society. And education should not be treated as just like another extension of Australia's GDP. Like, and that seems to be what it's transformed into over the last 10, 20 years, is basically just a product. To the extent that places are not being put aside, presumably, for Australian students, because a certain number of international students are going to come in, take those places, pay more, pay up front, pay for living services and other kinds of services. As you say, it's a dollar multiplier. Like,
I don't know if it's necessarily about limiting places for Australians. I don't know if that's so much the problem.
But there has to be some level of, like, capacity, right?
Well, this is the thing. Like, there is no capacity. It's basically a case of, if you're willing to pay, you can get a place in that course, and that's probably part of the problem, is that places aren't limited. The cap was removed by the Liberal government years and years ago, and it really started to take off by the time we were at university. And all of a sudden, you've got hundreds and hundreds of people coming to us to particular universities in particular courses, and what it means is you've got an oversupply of qualified labour, and it actually stuffs the job market up, more generally speaking. So it's great for the universities, it's great for the dollar multiplier of the economy. It gives you a lower quality of education, it ruins your job prospects. The other thing that's been reported, which we covered a couple of months ago...
Which, by the way, means you need to then go and get a master's or a postgrad, so the universities get even more money out of it, because you're in an increasingly competitive landscape for jobs. So you need to, again, it's an arms race, an educational arms race now.
It's a tough balance.
But the thing that was reported on, I think last year by Four Corners, was that there are certain universities where it's like, you can't fail this student, If you fail this student or this suite of students, it's going to look bad for us in terms of we're going to lose $60,000 worth of, potential people paying course fees.
I know it's not. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, and another part of that was stuff like the bar for entry. They kept lowering as well, right? Because like some people were just showing like genuine concern of like, I don't think like the communication barrier here is a bit too high. Like, I don't know, like this, it's not helping them or us if we can't like understand each other and all those sorts of things.
I was
exactly right.
It's I know the plural of anecdote is anecdotes, not data. But in my own life, I know people who have undertaken postgrads and have run into this exact situation where there are class members that they can't communicate with because they don't have the language skills. They're doing, it's not like they're doing hard sciences, right, where it's all numbers based or something like that. And you could go, okay, we're talking about humanities degrees where, you're having to write essays, you're having to do, that level of coursework and participate, and students that couldn't possibly achieve the standard actually required to pass the exams are getting passed through, and the tutors are acknowledging it. These are top tier universities. Yeah. And they're getting passed through, and they're frustrated about it, but there's nothing they can do because they're such an important source of revenue for the country. All of which is to say that, like, now that COVID-19 has happened and these students can't come here, and they're also getting travel advisories from their own government saying not to come here, it might be that our education system faces a pretty substantial financial crisis as a result, and it's all our fault. Like, we did this all to ourselves.
Yeah, Monash, a number of other, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney, a lot of these universities, UTAS as well in Tasmania, a lot of these universities are now offering, they're going through job cuts. And they've also got, like, because they've had, like, particularly Monash has been cash splashing with new buildings, new facilities, which is great, investing in infrastructure.
Reminds me of season 2 of Ozark, where they're just like, we just need to build buildings to get rid of all this dirty cash.
Well, they've spent all this money, but their cash reserves now are drastically low. So whether or not they've actually got the ability to get themselves through this crisis, it's going to be interesting. And yeah, there are a number of universities at the moment which are going through redundancies or other sort of job cuts. So what you've got is you've got a university sector that's got watered down education in terms of the product they're delivering, and also is now potentially facing financial ruin in a couple of circumstances.
The good news is, though, they will be able to socially distance in those buildings that they've just built, because there's going to be very few staff members in lots of buildings. So,
always a silver lining.
There's a silver lining. On that note,
is it a silver lining?
On that note, we are, and we always will be Unnatural Selection. Make sure you visit us on our salubrious home on the web, unnaturalshow.com. Make sure you follow us on all social medias that have, do, or ever will exist at Unnatural Show. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and motherfucking TikTok. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at George Tsipos.
You can follow me on Twitter at Tom D. Heath.
You can follow me on Instagram at AC Doreen.
And you can follow us all down to our old alma mater, where we'll be getting a first-class education because no one else is around to take performing arts classes anymore. Thanks for listening, guys. We love you, and we will see you next week.
I'm still filthy they cut our degree.
It's rare now. It's a mint precious degree now. Because it's limited edition.
Can't get one of them anymore.
It's literally can't.